We turn our attention somewhat further afield now, necessarily, given the scenes in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem overnight and for 6 families of Hamas hostages, the worst imaginable news was delivered this weekend as well. But it's when you combine those two events together that the situation becomes a little confusing, because it is against the Israeli government that protests are now gathering pace, and it is essentially a call upon the Israeli government to do more that is seeing a general strike begin this morning in Israel, one that could paralyze much of the country. If you have been following this issue via this program, then, well, 2 things. Number one, you'll know how much help Noga Tarnopolsky has provided, and we will return to her in Jerusalem shortly. But you'll also know that there has been, once you got your head around the idea that Benjamin Netanyahu was prioritizing his own political survival over everything, up to and including the fate of the hostages, then a sort of grim inevitability creeps into events. Once you have accepted that, the tolerance, not just the tolerance, but the promotion of criminals and terrorists in his own cabinet as a proof of the prioritization of his own political survival over everything else in play, which you can sit alongside the evilness and the depravity of Hamas. You can hold 2 thoughts in your head at the same time, as Ben Kentish rather brilliantly explained on this radio station this weekend. Once you accept Netanyahu's approach, there is, well, to my eye, my untutored eye, there is a gross inevitability to what we are seeing now, where protesters are blocking roads in Israel to demand a deal with Hamas over the ceasefire and the fate of the remaining hostages. Noga Tarnopolsky joins us now from Jerusalem. Is that a fair analysis of the situation, do you think, Noga? What would you add?
Hi, James. Yes, I do think so. And I think we have to add something that's difficult to discuss, but that has to be added in order to explain the eruption of emotion among Israelis. And it's the just abject, cruel, grotesque manner of these 6 hostages' deaths, because it's not a situation like has already happened in the past year, in which the cadavers of hostages were found and, months after they died or were killed, and as a result, the autopsies deliver kind of murky results.
Sure.
It's just not the case. These are 6 young people, and they were alive days ago. The forensic results were extremely clear that they were executed. They were days or minutes before their bodies were found. They were taken. They were shot numerous times, point blank in the heads. And so you think about young people, some of them gravely wounded, who managed to survive 11 months underground of torture, and were executed, shot point blank. People are talking about their last minutes of terror and that sort of thing. And that has really had a huge impact, the manner of their deaths.
You would need to explain to my listeners who haven't been following events super closely why this would see an explosion of anger against the government, while the government continues to justify its actions in Gaza by promising that they're doing their very best to get these hostages home. So the anger, to the untutored eye, should be directed at the terrorists. It should be directed at Hamas. And Netanyahu has cast himself as the man who will destroy Hamas. So what's gone wrong with that narrative?
If that's the crucial question. If you'll allow me, I want to quote a sentence from the American writer Franklin Foer, who I think managed to synthesize this. And what he writes is, he writes about the American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg-Polin, and he says his murder, the moral culpability for his murder rests entirely with Hamas depraved executioners. But Netanyahu behaved grotesquely when presented with opportunities to secure his release.
Right.
So what your listeners need to know is that on the night between Thursday and Friday, which turns out to be apparently the estimated time that these young people were taken out and executed, Netanyahu forced through his security cabinet, which is about half of his normal cabinet, a declarative decision announcing that no matter what hostage release deal is proposed to Israel, and no matter what Israel has agreed to in the past, the Israeli army will remain indefinitely on the Gaza-Egypt border. So not an Israeli border. And on the one hand, this is a meaningless, just declarative kind of decision passed by cabinet. This was passed at 2 a.m., by the way, with no announcement that this would even be brought to cabinet. But on the other hand, Israelis view it as the prime minister hijacking messaging in order to let Hamas know at a crucial moment in the hostage release negotiations that the hostages they're holding have no value to him. So what Netanyahu may perceive as showing his base that he's a tough guy and that he's tough against Hamas, it appears that a majority of Israelis perceive it as him choosing his own political survival, therefore winking at his base, instead of taking the brave and difficult decisions that a leader must take to save his own sequestered citizens.
So then we come, not for the first time, to the question of the leverage that portion of the population can exert upon Netanyahu. And the scale of the protests, compounded by the strike, is the strongest expression of that leverage we've seen so far.
Yes, and Israel really is kind of in a stranglehold. It's very difficult to describe, but about 500,000, an estimated 500,000 Israelis took to the streets last night on a Sunday night, which is a weeknight in Israel, and out of a population of just under 10 million.
Gosh.
Maybe you can translate that to British terms, but I did the calculation for Americans, and it's as if 15 million Americans had taken to the streets. And yet, the government, which has a very narrow but very unified kind of coalition majority, 64 out of 120 parliamentary seats, seems just to have seen its back stiffen. They seem to be responding to this protest and their magnitude by saying, we'll show you. And so over the course of the last few hours, Israeli government ministers have just doubled down on their messages of how they're going to just kind of intensify the fighting against Hamas. And again, we have to go back to what you said. I don't think there's a single Israeli of any sort who has any doubts that Hamas is a murderous Islamist militia, merciless. But that's not the point. For Israelis, the point is that they feel betrayed by their own government. And the government, in response to that, is basically saying, go scream on the streets. We don't care.
So how does it end?
I don't know. I don't know yet. And I feel like I'm kind of doubling down on my own journalistic training, and I'm limiting myself very closely to just telling you what is happening, because this could still explode in different directions, and it could end very, very badly for everybody. And so I don't want to guess or speculate. The Americans, I have to say, even though it's a holiday weekend for them, do seem to be showing some muscle. Maybe because this American citizen was killed, and maybe because they also feel it could have been prevented, but also because their elections are coming up. And I think that the Biden administration has more or less had it with Netanyahu's,
So how much has Netanyahu got riding on the hope of Trump coming back in then, do you think? Or are we beyond that kind of calculation now?
Well, according to the Israeli political reporters who follow him most closely, he has a lot riding on it. From what I see more from the point of view of a foreign correspondent here, he does and he doesn't. In other words, clearly, openly, he hopes that Donald Trump will win. He doesn't hide that. But I think he's also flexing muscle in an effort to show Kamala Harris, who he may not take as seriously as he should, to show her, see what I care.
Okay.
In much the same way as he's showing that to the Israeli population. And in this way, he may be actually harming Israel gravely, because if his message to a future American president is, see what I care, that president could gain a lot of popularity among her own base in the United States by saying, okay, bye-bye.
Yeah. And that, of course, has been the concern for everybody who refuses to see an Israeli life or a Palestinian life as different. The concern has always been that Israel will end up alienating its allies and jeopardizing its future security, while, of course, the carnage continues in Gaza. And I shouldn't have asked you that question. I shouldn't have sought to compromise your journalistic training, Noga. So I apologize for that. But you'll understand why the search for some sort of clarity or a clearer picture of what the light at the end of the tunnel may look like is one that concerns us all. Noga Tarnopolsky speaking to us live there from Jerusalem about the escalating situation there. And in the interests precisely of that objectivity, I would remind you, or perhaps bring to your attention news from the other side of the border between Gaza and Israel, that 640,000 children now have been targeted by the World Health Organization for vaccination after polio has reappeared in that territory for the first time in 25 years. The figure of the dead stands just north of 40,000 at the moment, with just shy of 100,000 wounded, although when the actual counting is completed after peace is finally imposed or achieved, those numbers are widely regarded to be set to skyrocket. And the likelihood of this ending anytime soon, given what Noga has just told us there, seems not to be diminished by the extraordinary scenes on the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and the action now, nationwide industrial action, a strike that is poised to bring the entire country to a standstill, calling upon Netanyahu to essentially recalibrate his prioritization of his own political future over everything else. His own defense minister. I mean, it's a mark of just how messy the whole situation is. Yoav Gallant calling on the security cabinet to reverse the decision that Noga Tarnopolsky was just describing to us about making a continued Israeli military presence along that Egypt-Gaza border a requirement for any ceasefire deal. So, it's just horrible and heartbreaking in every imaginable sense. But I make no apology for seeing the life of the 6 Israelis murdered in cold blood, apparently by Hamas this weekend. I feel just as sad and just as upset about those as I do about the continuing killings in Gaza as well. And I don't want to say I told you so, but I warned many people whose loyalty to Benjamin Netanyahu was absolutely unquestioning that they were doing more harm to their cause than they could ever realize. And now look where we are. 40,000 dead in Gaza. Hostages perceived to have been abandoned by Benjamin Netanyahu because the critique of his tactics is still not fully permitted. Even in this country, you'll still get people who claim that criticizing what Benjamin Netanyahu has done and is doing is somehow biased or prejudiced or bigoted or, God forbid, anti-Semitic. So well done, you.